Palestinian informs us of hearing the sound of a chainsaw in his backyard, and the soldiers search the grounds, arrive on the spot 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. They find a settler indeed doing so. And this guy, once again, isn't arrested. He's sent home. And he seems to appear in other incidents, other occasions, but is never arrested or detained, and is sort of referred to as that crazy guy. On one occasion, he's stealing a horse from a Palestinian farmer and eventually just runs away. And I wanted to maybe zoom into one incident that I think really exemplifies this dynamic between also the Palestinians and the settlers themselves, but also sort of where are soldiers in all of this? What are their orders? What are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to manage these situations? So the photo that we're looking at is from an incident that happened in 2014. As I said, I did service between 2013 and 15 in the region of Nablus. It's an early Tuesday morning. Civil administration forces enter one of the illegal outposts in this region, the area of a settlement called Shiloh and its satellite outposts, and enters an illegal outpost called Esh Kodesh, dismantles some structures that were built illegally, some water pipes that were connected without permits, and the settlers are, of course, very raged about this. And they decide to take action. But not against the military that actually issued these orders, but against the neighboring Palestinian village. And so around 10 o'clock in the morning, a group of young men from this outpost run through the valley. They're holding sticks and stones while they're uprooting olive trees, and they're looking for a target. They enter the village of Kusla, which was actually in the headlines a few months back because a few Palestinians were shot by settlers there in a series of what was framed as sort of accidents just week after week. But what happens in this case is that they run into the village and it's broad daylight, so they're met by a group of young Palestinian men, and very soon it gets very violent. As you can see, these two folks in the center of their photo are wounded in their faces, they were beaten up. And we actually get the call about what's going on there in the village from the Palestinian Authority that calls us and basically asks Israeli security forces to come and get them out of the village. So it's a bit of a weird situation if you think of it from the military's perspective. On the one hand, we're all panicking, right? It's almost as if there's Israelis who are abducted somehow in the Palestinian village. On the other hand, the Palestinians are those who are actually helping them get out, at least the sort of responsible grown-ups of the village. On the right hand, you can see the mayor of Kusla, and on the left here is actually one of the security, a member of the Palestinian security forces. And they managed to get these folks out. Looks something like these photos were circulating in Israeli media. Some settlers are familiar faces, at least in the Israeli public today. This guy, for example, was later on investigated for one of the most sort of severe events of settler violence that happened in 2015 of the burning of the Dawabsha family, the Palestinian family. But in any case, this is a pretty big deal. So they get medical care. Some of them are in an ambulance on the way to the clinic and then to the police station. Some of them are inside a military jeep. And what happens is that just a few minutes after that, we get a report from the soldiers saying 7 of them ran out of the ambulance and out of the police car or the military jeep. And that's it. And so I was a bit confused. I asked my commanders, well, do we have their information? Are they going to be soldiers going to chase after them? What's the protocol? And it was, again, this kind of lenient approach, like, okay, the ones we caught, they'll be investigated. The other ones doesn't really matter. I'm talking about this event, not only because of the violence itself, but also because what happens afterwards, and I think it really sort of exemplifies this this dynamic that actually shows, who's actually boss, who's actually in charge of things. Because after these folks run out of the ambulance and the military jeep, that same night the army says, we're going to do something unprecedented. We're actually going to set up an ambush of soldiers that's going to hide out in one of these fields in the valley and make sure that settlers don't come that night and try to harm the village again. And I'm saying unprecedented because usually again, it's the police that is supposed to enforce the law on Israeli civilians and not the Israeli military. But these settlers are a bit smarter than that, and they do another, what we call a price tag attack, another act of terrorism sort of in another village in the north of the region that same night, a village called Madame, burn some cars, spray some graffiti, and make it very clear that there's a correlation to that previous event. And I think for me this was one of the moments in which I saw very clearly, first of all, how the system itself is basically not doing anything in face of this violence, and how, in a way, those who are breaking the law have mastered the system in which they're sort of above it. But this is a situation that soldiers find themselves time and time again in, and that we've asked soldiers about in our testimonies, in their testimonies many times. So questions like, if a Palestinian throws stones at a settler, and a settler throws stones at a Palestinian, what are you supposed to do? This is a part of a testimony of a soldier who served in 2013 in Agos, which is one of the sort of elite combat units. He says, protect the settler, no question. It's so obvious that nobody has to say it. I've never heard of a single case where the IDF arrested a settler unless they got a special order. If here, and he's referring to Israel proper, everything is imagined in one way, over there, everything is imagined in a different way. Anybody who's an Arab, you view them as an enemy. You're part of an army that's meant to defend the settlers, and you defend them from the Arabs. This division is very clear. And a similar question that is asked, that soldiers are asked in various forms, what are the instructions regarding Jews, Israeli settlers rioting? That was our main problem. There weren't any instructions. What do you mean? We only had instructions regarding Arabs. And if a Jew threw a stone at you, at the soldier, nothing. There was nothing I could do. I'd yell at him to stop it, but what could I do? No orders, that's the problem. So what these soldiers are shedding light on is actually a reality in which the soldiers themselves become a target when there is some sort of action committed by the military that is not to their liking, to their political stance of entrenching and expanding the settlements. And I wanted us to watch, to watch a video testimony of Gil, one of Breaking the Silence testifiers, who served in Hebron, Palestinian city in the south of the West Bank. She serves there during the Second Intifada, which again is a very violent time period for both Israelis and Palestinians. And she served in a unit called Sakhlav, which actually doesn't exist anymore, but is sort of a form of border police. And she'll basically share about a specific incident that took place during her service.
אחד האירועים הכי זכורים לי וחרותים בזיכרון זה הלוויה שהייתה ביישוב היהודי. איזשהו חייל נהרג אני חושבת שאירוע על ציר 60, ירו בו, וזה יצר איזושהי תסיסה מאוד גדולה בקרב המתנחלים. ההלוויה עצמה הייתה מאוד מאוד קשה. זאת אומרת, המתנחלים התפרעו ברמות שאני לא הכרתי. זו הייתה פעם ראשונה שנפגשתי בכזאת אלימות מצד המתנחלים. אנחנו הבטחנו אותם כביכול, היינו שם בשביל להגן עליהם מהפלסטינים. בסופו של דבר מצאתי את עצמי מגנה על הפלסטינים, על המתנחל. הם פשוט הלכו ברחוב, בשביל שמוביל לכיוון בית העלמין. וכל השביל הזה הוא שביל שמשני צידיו יש בתים של פלסטינאים. הרי היישוב היהודי יושב ויש לו חתכים שיושבים בו פלסטינאים. והם פשוט הלכו, המתנחלים, בכל השביל הזה, דרכו נשקים וירו בחלונות, לקחו אבנים, בלטות, מה שאתה רוצה, פוצצו את הבתים של הפלסטינים מסביב, כאילו, זה הגיע למצב, עכשיו למה אני זוכרת את זה ממש טוב? כי זה הגיע למצב שממש לקראת הכניסה לבית העלמין נעצרה השיירה, וזה נעצרנו בדיוק מול בית של פלסטינאים. והמתנחלים התחילו לשבור את חומת בטון, וזה חומת בטון, הם פשוט שברו את כל החומה, שמו אותנו בשביל להגן על הבית, אז הם פשוט הפילו אותנו על הבלטות, על החומת בטון, הפילו אותנו, שברו הכל, ורמסו אותנו, הם נעלו מעלינו ועלינו ודרכו עלינו בכיוון הבית, קמו מהר שוב, עשינו חומה מסביב לבית ממש, והם פשוט התחילו להרוג אצלנו. אז זה שלא נתנו לו להיכנס לבית. ואז היה איזה קטע ששמעתי את אחד הם אומרים, טוב, חבר'ה, אז הוא מצאתי פתרון אחר. ואז אומרים, לגז יש אחלה שימוש. משהו כזה ציני, ואז כולם הלכו. ומסתבר שהם, לא יודעת איך הם יצרו את זה, אבל הם פשוט יצרו דליפה בגז לתוך הבית. עכשיו, אני לא יודעת אם הייתה שם משפחה או לא. אני זוכרת מה שזכור לי שהייתה, אבל אני לא יודעת להגיד אם הייתה או לא, אבל אני זוכרת לעצמי את הסיטואציה, אמרתי, יואו, אם אני הייתי בתוך הבית הזה, על האיסטר, איזה פחד זה. כאילו, אני כולי מרוטה בדם, כאילו מלאה בדם, מלאה בזה, כי כולי חבלות. וכל מה שאני יכולה לחשוב עליו זה על מי אני באמת מגנה פה, ולמה אני עושה פה. וזה אירוע שמאוד מאוד זכור לי, כי אני חושבת שזה היה התחלה של הסדק, שהגעתי להגן על המדינה, ואז אתה אומר לך, אבל זו המדינה שלי. ככה נראית המדינה שלי, ככה מתנהגים האנשים בתוך המדינה שלי.
I've watched his testimony many times, but somehow it really always manages to hit home for me. And I think the most important part of what she manages to shed light on is really this impossible situation in which soldiers essentially are sent to the West Bank and are told that their role is to protect the Israeli civilians no matter where they are, no matter what they're doing. But oftentimes the violence that is usually aimed towards Palestinians is even aimed towards themselves, towards them as soldiers who are there to protect them. And this is not a reality that was unique to the Second Intifada. Of course, there were more of these types of incidents, but I served much later, to be precise, more than 10 years later than Gil, and during 2014, when things were very tense in the region that I was at in terms of violence from settlers towards border patrol soldiers mostly. On one occasion, the Brigadier General, the highest ranking officer who's in charge of the whole region, goes to visit one of these settlements, the council of the settlement of Yitzhak, which is very infamously known for sort of this extremist ideology. And while he's in the meeting with the council of the settlement, asking them about their security and how they can improve their needs, he's essentially, if you think about it, their representative, because we're talking about a military regime and not democracy. But he's there to meet them and to hear their concerns. And at the same time, his Jeep is parked right outside, and the tires of his Jeep are slashed by a few young settlers. And there's no comment on that. As this high-ranking officer towards all the hundreds of soldiers that are under his responsibility, what's right, what's wrong? Are we supposed to enforce the law? How can we ensure our safety as soldiers? Nothing. And 2 weeks later, the same exact thing happens. The same Brigadier General, the same Jeep, the same settlement. The only person who responded at the time was the Israeli defense minister, who says on public TV that, of course, condemns it and says that it's not okay and the law must be enforced. But as soldiers, the reality is that we're told time and time again that this is not our job, that we're not supposed to touch the Israelis. But when the police is supposed to show up, oftentimes they don't show up or don't arrest or indict anyone. And so I wanted to, I would like to talk about some other issues that I think really exemplify sort of what this military regime looks like in the West Bank, but just to maybe focus on one more story that to me is very important. I don't know if this photo is familiar to any of you. This is the Wabshe family, Palestinian family from the village of Duma, also in the region of Nablus, who in late 2015, a few young settlers enter their home in the middle of the night, throw Molotov cocktails, and kill their two parents and their baby. And their other son just recently healed from his wounds and is being now taken care of by his grandfather. And this was really considered one of the most violent incidents in terms of Israeli violence against Palestinians in a very long period of time. It was condemned, pretty much from the whole spectrum of right and left, including, people who are quite affiliated with the settler movement. Everyone was trying to say, this is not us, this is not our values. These are just rotten apples. They don't represent the majority or our values or our policy. And I thought it was quite strange that everyone was condemning that, so widespread, because during my service, fortunately, nothing happened to the family, but a very same attempt was made. The village of Bulin, also another village in this region, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, we get a phone call from a Palestinian in that village who says, settlers tried to burn my house down. So it's a pretty big deal. A few soldiers start searching the area around his house. They find no settlers, no evidence, and they see a few cars that were torched, and they assume that it's some inner conflict within the village. It has nothing to do with us. But he really insists, and he calls again, and he manages to tell his story. He was just putting his children to sleep. He hears what he thinks is stones being thrown at the house. He goes out to the balcony and sees 2 Molotov cocktails, one that is set afire, the other one burns out on its own, and he burns out the fire, makes the call, and eventually, after they manage to really hear him out, more soldiers come and search, and it's a really big operation. The whole brigade is over there. And about 4 hours later, after military trackers were also brought on the spot, around midnight, we get a report saying that basically the case is closed. The military trackers that found direct tracks from the house leading up to one of the outposts of the settlement of Balcha. The military trackers lost the tracks. Now, it's an outpost of about 10 homes, 10 structures on a hilltop. If this was a Palestinian village, they would have knocked on doors, they would have arrested people. That very same night, there would have been interrogations and arrests of people in that village. Even if we didn't find the person who did it, we would make sure that what we call in the military, to make our presence felt, or to demonstrate our presence, to make those people know that we're here and we're in charge, and it's actually not you that are in control of your life. But that doesn't happen if this crime is committed by Israelis in illegal outposts in the West Bank. And trying to connect the dots, kind of for me, this story of this family and this crime was really not so surprising. I mean, for anyone who's following the daily stone throwing, the cutting down of olive trees, the desecration of holy sites, all of that, you cannot be surprised when also some of these more severe incidents take place that really take the lives of people. So I did want to talk about one more thing that I think, for me at least and from my perspective, is very crucial to understanding what is the role of soldiers in the military and how do things operate in the West Bank. I mentioned briefly permits. Dozens of thousands of Palestinians who rely on permits to work inside Israel or to work even inside the settlements in the West Bank, even just to leave the West Bank and fly abroad. There's a permit for pretty much anything you can imagine, over 100 different types of permits, from a permit to access your own agricultural land that might be trapped between the green line, the border, and the separation barrier, a special permit for Christians from the Gaza Strip to visit Jerusalem while the Pope is visiting. And I think that, just kind of to get a sense of what this looks like for folks who don't know, it's a piece of paper. It has one of those like silvery things that so you can't fake them, kind of like a bill. It's a piece of paper that can give people the opportunity to move freely, which is a right that is taken from them every single day. Something that maybe we would just kind of think of as a bill that we forgot to pay that would be lying on the table. And again, this is something that 19, 20-year-old soldiers are doing on a daily basis. They're sitting in booths, stamping these permits according to very specific criteria. And I think that one of the ways that the system itself, the civil administration, and sort of the Israeli narrative around these issues, we talk about this in terms of this is actually our goodwill. We're giving Palestinians the right or the ability to go and get medical care inside Israel. We don't have to. This is just our goodwill. We're giving them the opportunity to get a job inside Israel when there's 20% unemployment in the West Bank. So this is all just our goodwill, right? And no one's really demanding this from us. And I think and the language also was one of cooperation, liaison, coordination. This was kind of the language that we used. And we thought of ourselves as the good side of things. Like the civil administration is actually here for the benefit of the Palestinians. You'll hear this all the time in the official spokesperson's language. And I think for me, part of leaving this system and trying to look at things more critically is also a process of changing the language. These are not two equal sides that are having diplomatic relations and are coordinating with one another. This is a side that is controlling the other everyday movement and ability to provide for families and really just everyday basic needs. Even the Palestinian Prime Minister, for that matter, was stopped many times, at least just during my time in the Nablus area. He lives in Nablus, Rami Hamdallah, works in Ramallah at the headquarters of the PA, and there were a few times where he was stopped at random checkpoints of 18, 19-year-old soldiers. And that's just part of how it works. Even if you're the most high-ranking up Palestinian, you can expect that your freedom will be taken from you by a 19-year-old soldier. And so I think for me, the way that I understood really fully what permits are, what this means for Palestinians was actually during the holiday of Ramadan, which is a month long of, as you know, fasting and feasting in the evening. And the last 3 days of it are a very big celebration in which naturally many Muslims want to enter Jerusalem, many Palestinians want to enter Jerusalem to pray at the Temple Mount. And this is really, the fact that we have so much force gives us the ability to give more permits, to take back permits. We can decide how much we want to give or take. And so in the summer of 2014, this is after 3 Israeli boys are abducted and killed by Hamas in the West Bank. Turns into a major military operation to search for their bodies and eventually do all kinds of other military operations, what leads into the major war in Gaza in the summer of 2014. And so there's this escalation growing, things are really heating up, and there's a policy from the civil administration and probably higher up, the Minister of Defense, they decide to actually give extra permits for each region in the West Bank to visit Jerusalem. And this is kind of, an attempt to cool things down, to give a carrot, all in all, sounds like a good idea, at least from the Israeli perspective. The only issue is that the Palestinian side of things is only informed 2 days before the holiday. So in the Nablus region, what happens is that I'm in the operations room, my other co-workers are in the sort of reception hall where Palestinians come, wait in line, go to the booth. And hundreds of mostly young Palestinian men really just start entering the place, swarming. It's completely chaotic. Everyone just wants this piece of paper that allows them to, in this case, enter Israel for 3 days. Usually, as it's in Hebrew, but or in Arabic for those who read. Usually, a permit is to a specific location, is limited by in area and time, and etc. You'll see the ID number of the person whose the permit is given to. This is something I found online, so no worries about privacy. But their name, their full name, where they're from, where they're allowed to leave to. In this case, prisons in Israel for the purpose of visiting a prisoner. There's always, from 5 o'clock in the morning till 7 in the evening, Sunday through Thursday. And in this case, back in that summer of 2014, there's a permit that allows one to visit Israel for 3 days without any restriction. So you can imagine this is a huge deal, right? People can go to Jerusalem, they can also visit their family, they can also just maybe go to the beach in Tel Aviv, something that they never had the opportunity to do. Hundreds of people show up. It's very chaotic. They start breaking down the doors and the entrance and chairs. And it started out sort of, I would say, almost exciting. People are smiling and cheering and calling out to their friends. And very soon it really escalated. And you could sense, really a feeling of desperation. And a few hours later, the officers decide to shut down the reception hall. We had to write some